a seat to think of the back.
Visitor since it opened up, so you get a prize.
Good evening. I'd like to call our Town of Sydney regular council meeting on Monday, April 11th to order at 6 p.m. And hello to colleagues on council. All of us are in the chamber this evening. We'll have staff participating in the council chamber and also virtually via Zoom. Those staff, you will see them on your screen when they are speaking. And good evening to a member of the public in our gallery this evening, and to those who may be watching the live webcast. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge we're holding our meeting this evening in the territory of the Wasanich Nations, the Tsawit Nation, the Sartlip Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Malahat Nation. And we express our gratitude for the Wasanich people's stewardship of these lands for millennia, and we seek to build our government-to-government relationship with the Wasanich Nations. I'll turn to approval of the agenda. There are one addition and a change. The one addition is Councillor Duncan will have a verbal update in her liaison role to the Sydney BIA. And Council will have received revised minutes for the OCP Advisory Committee under 12A. And with that, I would look for approval of the amended agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? None opposed. That carries. Thank you. We'll turn to public participation. I'll open the floor to any speakers for public participation. I'll call for a second time. Seeing none, we do not have any speakers registered under public participation to address council this evening. So I will move to presentations, and we do have under presentations and petitions and delegations under 4D1 we are expecting Ms. Joanne Edwards to address council this evening. I'll just turn to Ms. Nelson if she is available at this time.
No, Ms. Edwards has not logged in.
Okay, thank you. So I will set that item aside for now, and we will move to the next two items on the agenda, bylaws under 5A and 5B. That will give a little bit more time if Ms. Edwards is able to join us this evening, and if not, we will deal with that matter on the agenda after the bylaws. So I'll turn to the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout Loan Authorization, bylaw number 2228. And I'll turn to Mr. Hissick for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at the last meeting, Council added a new project to our budget, and that's pursuant to a three-party MOU to construct a roundabout with associated road improvements on the west side of Beacon. So at the last meeting, when presented with the option, Council elected that we should borrow for the town's share of up to $2 million. Rather than internally financing our portion of the project. A loan authorization bylaw is being introduced here as the first step in that process. Unlike most bylaws, this has to go through a couple of extra steps before it can be adopted. That includes ministry approval, as well as a decision on either assent of the electors or electing to go with our assent-free borrowing room. So staff are recommending assent-free borrowing for this project, primarily because the project itself is not controversial and has been approved. A referendum or alternate approval process would typically be used for a more controversial project that hinges on public acceptance, whereas for this one, if the AAP prevents borrowing, council might still be motivated to proceed with the use of internal funding. Therefore, the project itself is not likely to be at peril, and we are not wanting to slow this down by an extra month just to go through that process. The annual cost of servicing this debt would be approximately $155,000, with the borrowing rates not established until much later in the process. We may end up needing less than $2 million, for instance, if there are cost savings, or if there are grants approved for this project. And just for council's information, the loan might be paid back after the initial term of 5 or 10 years if it's deemed desirable at that time. If council has any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'll turn to colleagues. I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, do we now have confirmation that the VAA is paying for their portion? I know last time we spoke, DNS had said they were, but you weren't sure about VAA.
It has been confirmed in writing, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? So we can proceed this evening with separate motions for 3 readings and then a decision on assent-free borrowing.
I'll move first reading for the Beacon Avenue West Roundabout Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2228.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? And none opposed. Motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call all in favor. None opposed. Motion carries.
I'll move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. And we have a motion with regards to assent-free borrowing. A recommendation, Councillor Rintoul.
I'll move that council authorize assent-free borrowing for approval of the borrowing.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't be supporting this recommendation. I would have preferred the alternate approval process. I know that this isn't the equivalent amount the CSB loan was, and it's within our capabilities of doing it, but I still feel like it's always been my approach. I think that the taxpayer should have a say on how their money's spent. And $2 million, although not as large, may not seem as large to some. To me, it's still a significant amount of money. It's potentially over 20 years. We don't know the loan rate yet. For me, there's also some unanswered questions in terms of unknowns in terms of labor shortage potential, supply chain issues, which we're already seeing and are not alleviating at this time. Also, we don't know what effect the Ukraine-Russia conflict is going to have, and that's still ongoing, and there's no end in sight for that as well. And concerns over what the interest rate might be at the time that we lock in is also something that I have concerns about. And so, but as it comes down to, for me, and I've always stated during the last election, my position is that when we come to significant borrowing, that the taxpayers who are on the hook for this in the end should have a say on how their money's spent. So I won't support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I also am going to vote against this. I would prefer the alternate approval process. And I would agree with staff comment. I do believe that that this isn't controversial, that there will be vast majority support from the residents, and that the alternate approval will carry. I guess my reason for not wanting to take advantage of the assent-free is I think there was a loss of trust, the previous council, with respect to borrowing, and I think that if we really do believe this is a good project for the town and that everyone will support it, why would we be afraid of doing the alternate approval process? And I think it's a step to restoring that lost trust.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm comfortable with the motion as is put forward, and in part because I recognize that the alternate for council also means some additional staff time and work on this. I don't think the suggestion is in relation to you know, being afraid of the outcome of that process. That's not the case. I think it's the case of where we see there to be inefficiency, and we know we're looking at infrastructure that's overdue. We know we have an opportunity here to share the costs on this project 3 ways, and it's a project where simply there's no avoiding it proceeding. And so not that I wouldn't welcome feedback from the community. We'll have, I believe, that opportunity before this bylaw goes to final reading to hear some thoughts on the bylaw itself, and I remain comfortable moving the recommendation. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett, and then to Councillor O'Keefe, and then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm essentially comfortable with going forward with the borrowing because I feel that this is a project that has been talked about, discussed, and asked for a long time. I think the community sees the need, and we haven't heard any noises from the community at this point, up to this point, that there is concern about the project. So, and I certainly think back to the previous term and the community's concern, but I think there was a few other mitigating factors in that particular project where the assent free created some difficulties. I don't see it here. The only difficulty I have with this particular project is because we're not locking in for another 18 to 24 months on the borrowing rate. And while I understand that that's just part of the process with this, we are living in a time that is filled with uncertainties. And there is no crystal ball, I get all of that. But agreeing to borrow money today and not knowing what the rate is, and knowing that the rates will be going up, and that we're already experiencing supply chain issues, how this may impact the work that lies before us, and what else may come before the town between now and up to 24 months from now. Look where we were 24 months ago, right? There's a lot of changes. So I have some concerns in that regard. I am comfortable otherwise, but that part is a bit of a stumbling block for me. So I'm going to listen to the rest of council for their comments and see where I go on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in favor of this for a number of reasons. During the discussions on Amazon, we heard a significant amount of feedback from the residents in the Galaran neighborhood, especially, that they wanted a roundabout there. We've heard from the business community. We've heard over and over again that that's been an issue, the concern about the traffic there, and to do something about it. So in terms of whether the community thinks this is a good idea, I think they will support it. And we've already decided to go ahead with it. The only thing now to decide is, are we going to go out and borrow the money, or are we going to try and fund it internally? It makes more sense to go out and borrow the money, so we have some more flexibility internally. And I see us being able to do that. So, you know, there's been reference made to potential supply chain issues and issues on how the war in Ukraine might impact this project. Yeah, those things might happen. We don't know for sure, but I think we leave ourselves more flexibility by borrowing the money, and then we leave ourselves the opportunity to use internal sources to supplement if we get into the situation where there's a cost overrun. In terms of going out to the public and asking, you know, what they think about this, as I said before, I think there's strong support for it already. I think we could do it, but I think it delays the process. You know, there's been concern expressed about the longer this takes to lock in, we might have to pay high interest rates. So I'm more in favor of let's get on with it. Let's go through the process, and that will help us lock in our rates quicker. And as mentioned, it's just more efficient and to go ahead with that. So I'm uncomfortable supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I'm comfortable supporting the asset-free borrowing as it is for a number of the reasons that my colleagues have gone over, particularly Councillor Rintoul's points. I understand my colleagues' concerns about it and wanting to go out to a public process, but I'm concerned that we've done an OCP and we've done the dog park, and we've done a lot of consultation lately, and I feel that this would end up being another thing that people were asked an opinion of that had the potential to take something that I think people are quite comfortable with right now and then make people think harder about things and perhaps bring out people who may very well indeed still have remembrances of trust issues that they will conflate this one with that do not apply, I think, in perhaps the way that Councillor Fallett has already alluded to. And so I am concerned about making it look like a larger deal than it is in a way that might really muddy the issue at this point when people are quite fatigued. I understand concerns about changes in interest rate over time as well. However, I think that anything that's going to really affect interest rates and supply chain issues for this project are going to be the very same things that moot the need for this project in the first place. It will mean either we end up not going forward with the project, or the project is delayed and therefore we aren't borrowing in the first place, or we borrow the money and the project doesn't go, in which case, you know, we don't pay interest on money that never gets spent on something. So overall, I think this is probably the best course of action for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll make my comments in just a moment, but I have a question through to staff, and that is, we understand from the staff report and the introduction from Mr. Hissick that we won't be locking in. There will be interim financing until the project is complete. When the project is complete, then we will lock in, and that will come back to council at that time. Does council have the option at that time of reconsidering how to finance the project? That is, prior to coming to this meeting and prior to council requesting this bylaw come forward, we did consider internal borrowing, and we deliberated on that and chose the borrowing route. But I'll
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the question will come back to council, and there is an opportunity, even if we adopt the bylaw, to not end up borrowing a penny here. So the earliest we could possibly lock in, due to all the approvals required, would be the fall of this year anyway. As of this moment, I wouldn't recommend even doing it then, because there are still uncertainties about project funding and uncertainties about where long-term rates are going. And the difference between fall of this year and fall of next year, I don't anticipate will be greater than 1% maximum. And you know, the quicker we lock in, the more we eliminate our flexibility to choose alternate funding or to reduce the amount we ultimately borrow.
And a second question is, this approval of this bylaw also authorizes the interim financing component to the project?
That'll have to be a separate process. Once this bylaw is adopted, I'll bring back at the same meeting a temporary borrowing bylaw, which it essentially only takes 2 meetings to approve. Thank you.
I'm in support of the motion to proceed assent-free. I respect the opinions of the colleagues who are opposed, and I was certainly well aware of and had concerns personally with the large $10 million borrowing that did not go before the public for consideration during the last term, and that concern was over not going through that process was expressed by members of the public to elected representatives, and just in discussion with each other within the community. We've been discussing this project and the partnership with Victoria Airport Authority and North Saanich for a number of months now, and we've focused in more on the method of financing, whether it would be from internal reserves or this borrowing. And we have not had anyone come before us at council. I've not been contacted myself. Am not aware of concern. I think, as a colleague mentioned, that I have heard, and I believe, and others of us have heard, that the community is very supportive of this project, and that they would want to see this project go forward. And would they be concerned about the borrowing, or thinking that we should be borrowing internally instead of borrowing? They're going to want to see the project go forward. Appreciating that there is some uncertainty in the future, we are aware through the reports and the report we have this evening before us that we have significant capacity for borrowing. We are financially healthy, and so I'm comfortable moving forward with this process as a cent free. If it was a different type of project where there was concern about the project within the community, or it was a higher level of borrowing, I might think otherwise. But I think those are the circumstances that make this project unique. Thank you. I'll look for any second-time speakers. Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? The two opposed, Councillor Garnett and Councillor Wainwright. The motion carries. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you want to deal with Ms. Edwards at this time. She has been waiting for a while, or did you want to wait till the next item?
No, thank you, Ms. Nelson, for making me aware she's attended. We will now go back to item 4D on our agenda, which is the presentation of a petition. And I would just like to confirm Ms. Joanne Edwards is connected. If you can confirm your audio, and if you choose to also use your video, and then I'll just briefly introduce your petition presentation.
Ms. Edwards, can you hear us okay? You're just on mute. If you could turn your audio on.
Yes.
Great. Great, we can hear you, and I'll just pass it over to the mayor now.
Good evening, Ms. Edwards. We have before us a request to amend our noise bylaw to address excessive construction noise and shaking. We have Ms. Joanne Edwards, a local resident, who is here to present the petition and speak to council this evening. The floor is yours, Ms. Edwards.
Thank you very much. So my name is Joanne, and I live at 2388 Marvette Place, which is alongside Schooner Close and by the construction site of the Rise, which is opposite of Tallista Park. So I have just a few remarks noted down here, so I apologize for looking down. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak regarding this request from my neighbors and I, who live on Marvette, Schooner Close, right next to the construction site. This petition includes signatures from at least 18 of my neighbors, and I could have collected more, but as a working parent, I really was limited in how far I could go. We are requesting an amendment to the noise bylaw 1689 to distinguish between normal residential construction noise and noise that's coming from large-scale multi-unit residential or commercial buildings. Specifically, we're calling on members of council to limit the construction hours of these such sites, these large multi-unit buildings that are adjacent to residential areas like our own, from a period from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Fridays. This request reflects The extraordinary conditions that we had to experience last month in our neighborhood next to the Rise on 5th, which is currently under construction. For most of the month of March, the residents of Marvette Place, Schooner Close, Iroquois Way, Wheeler Avenue, and 5th Street and beyond had to endure non-stop vibrations, leading to often loud and violent shaking of our homes as crews worked on the building, a building that most of the residents overwhelmingly rejected. Sundays was the only day that we had a break from the shaking. The source of the shaking was the sheet piling construction method that Garrett Construction used to excavate the property. The starting and stopping of the machines caused homes to shake, which was not unlike a large earthquake, which rattled our homes, shook our furniture, our belongings, and anything on our walls. The vibrations from the sheet piling could start as early as 7:30 a.m. and would continue well past 6 p.m. on most days. And much to my surprise and to my horror, the work would rev up again on Saturdays. When I questioned building officials on these hours, they recommended I write to the town with a request and encourage my neighbors to do the same. So that's what I did. Observed damages that I've experienced from the vibrations so far in my own home close to the site include leaks and damages to my new underground irrigation system, cracked grout in our newly renovated fireplace hearth, and toppled glasses and cupboards. The vibrations even burst a plastic jug which contained our emergency supply water and caused water damage to our storage closet. Yet it's really the unseen potential damage and cracks to our home that worry us the most. I reached out to both the town and the developer, and my concerns were largely dismissed. Building officials told me that it was within bylaw hours and that the town had no rules or standards surrounding this method of construction that they could enforce. And I was told if any damages did occur to my home, it was up to me to sue the developer. The experience of reaching out to my neighbors with this petition really made it clear that many shared my same concerns and the disruptions to their daily life. While we're a diverse group of neighbors, we share many things. Most of us are homeowners with a deep concern to the potential damages that this shaking caused to our homes from the steel piling, now or into the future. Homeowners and renters in our neighborhood alike shared stories with me of their belongings falling from walls and shelves and breaking, and having to scramble to pack up their precious belongings before they could break. Most of us are home all day, but for a variety of different reasons, yet we all had to live through the same noise and shaking of our homes. Some of the residents in this neighborhood are retired. Others, like myself, were struggling to work through from home, trying to hear our colleagues and work through the stress of the noise. Some neighbors are elderly, many of whom have health issues that limit their ability to leave, or were deeply distressed by the shaking because they didn't understand what was happening to them. Some neighbors are essential workers and work nights and struggle to sleep during the day through the noise and the shaking. Others are sleep-deprived parents, some with children close to the site as young as 4 months old, and were desperate to find a quiet environment for themselves and their children, and often had to resort to driving around in their car so their child could sleep. The existing bylaw hours of 7 to 7 Monday to Friday or 8 to 7 on Saturdays is reasonable for your typical residential construction noise of single-family homes, decks, garages, fences, replacing a roof, whatever it might be, that the typical construction that would happen in a neighborhood. But it's not reasonable for this category and scale of construction that might involve things like blasting, steel piling, and other large heavy equipment and machines that can cause significant disruption to people's neighbor properties and in their neighborhood. And just what we just want to say is that with Sydney growing as it is, and the scale of the construction is growing along with it, as are the methods of construction are changing. So accordingly, officials need to do more to dampen this type of disruption that this category of construction causes. And the reason we're calling on you to limit the hours of large multi-unit buildings adjacent to neighborhoods such as my own to Monday and Fridays is that the current shaking and vibrations in our neighborhood near the Rise has since stopped, but the construction noise and the disruptions from the site is far from over, and as well as other developments, and could go on for some time. Specifically, our neighborhood also has the additional threat of the redevelopment of the Cedarwood Inn and Suites. And if this is any preview of what to experience, more needs to be done to protect the people in this neighborhood from such disruption. So in closing, the noise and disturbances caused by the construction on the rise and others like it are extraordinary. It's not normal residential construction, and neighbors should not have to suffer through it during the early evening hours and into the weekends, especially with the nicer weather approaching and limiting our ability to be outdoors in our own property. That was really the gist of what I had to say, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards, for coming and speaking before council this evening. We'll now turn to council colleagues if they have any questions for clarification. I'll turn first to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Did you receive any advance notice from the construction or developer that particular stuff was going to happen and when it was going to happen?
No.
Okay, thank you.
But from my discussions with neighbors, there was only 2 that had any warning, and the developer had gone out on site prior to the work starting.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, Councillor Garnett asked my question, but I'm also interested in what sort of response you got from the developer when you, I presume, I think you said you contacted them. Did they have any suggestions, or were they sympathetic, or?
On the surface, maybe sympathetic, but what we were told was that an engineer, a geotechnical engineer, was
Ms. Edwards. If I might interject, we're not hearing you as well as when you were presenting. I'm not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I would say on the surface, there was one day that was particularly bad. I think the phones of Sydney lit up on that day. I think when they brought in a second machine for the vibrations, and after that point, a geotechnical engineer was brought on site to monitor the vibrations. So while there was maybe I'm sorry for the inconvenience, that's pretty much all we were told. And so I did speak with both building officials as well as the developer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Sorry, did you wish to add anything?
From what I was told by building officials, this method of construction is not terribly common, and there's not a lot of regulations around it. From what I understand, if it had been blasting, there would have been a lot more notification and a lot of rules that would have gone along with it.
Thank you. I've seen no other questions from colleagues. I do have one, and you did touch on it during your presentation. And how many hours a day did you experience on more than one occasion of construction, whether it be the sheet piling or otherwise?
Some days it would go from 7:30 in the morning to past 6 o'clock at night. Other days it would stop and start. There would be, but you never knew when it was going to start again.
Okay, thank you. So I seeing no further questions from colleagues. Thank you, Ms. Edwards, again for coming before council. I'll close this portion of the presentation, and council will now, it's on our agenda to now debate and pass a motion with regards to your request. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mayor. This seems to be an issue that we should be taking action on. I'd move that we refer this to staff for a report.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor Wainwright?
I don't think I need to say anything further. I think it's pretty straightforward, and that Ms. Edwards made all the points that need to be made.
Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to provide a little bit of context, I did reach out to a coworker who lives in the Blue Waters, which is the building right next to it, and asked before I knew this was coming forward, I asked the question if she'd received advance notification, and she told me no, and that she actually thought that there was an earthquake happening when it originally started, and was quite panicked. And further to that, I have to say, because I deliver on the other side of the highway, I wondered what the noise was when it started myself. And there actually, as I got to boxes that were closer to the other side of the highway, I could actually feel it underground. So I feel really bad for them, because I was experiencing noise levels and disruption of my feet just standing on the ground on the opposite, and I was a long ways away from compared to the residents. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. Ms. Edwards talked about that there's protocol and procedures around blasting, and none or little regarding sheet piling. Is that staff's experience as well? Is this something that we haven't perhaps here in Sydney had a lot to do with? But are there industry standards of how, when, where, why this happens?
If I can, through the Mayor to Councillor Fallett, no, that's correct. It's my understanding that there are regulations around blasting that are pretty clear, whether they're as part of the BC Building Code, whether they're part of WorkSafe requirements through WorkSafe BC. There are requirements around notification, etc. Certainly, development services staff might be able to expand a little bit more on what those details are. But it's also our understanding, yes, there are very few clear regulations regarding sheet pile driving. It is a rarely used construction technique. We used it with respect to the Ray Creek Dam project. Yeah. When that project was being undertaken, we received concerns from the surrounding residents. Because it was a municipal project on municipal property, we went sort of above and beyond on that one and notified the residents with respect to that construction work. We still received a number of concerns. We altered our method, and we still received concerns because it's a challenging type of construction anytime you're looking at vibration or pile driving. Those are two ways of inserting the sheet pile, and but both are disruptive without question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. Councillor O'Keefe.
If I may
sorry.
just,
Councillor
Ms.
O'Keefe.
Verhagen, and then I just want to
Sorry, I see Ms. Verhagen. Good evening.
Good evening. Just to add some comments about building bylaw regulations around different construction methods. The town's building bylaw does have a section on blasting permit. So a permit is required for blasting. It has different hours permitted for blasting. It allows it to be 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday to Friday. And it does have a notification requirement. So somebody who is going to be blasting has to give notice at least 24 hours before the activity commences to owners and occupants of any building within a radius of 100 meters of the site, and a couple others as well. So there is a requirement for that for blasting, but not for other construction methods, including sheet piling.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen.
So just, if I may just hook on into that. So I think moving forward, that's something that we're obviously going to have to address. This may happen in our community again. And I think staff's report will certainly address something like that. My heart goes out to the neighborhood right now that had to live through that and under those circumstances. But I think it's been an incredible learning curve for us, because it is something that we just haven't had to deal with to a great degree. So I look forward to that staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Some questions through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff. So from what I'm understanding, the major issue was the vibration involving the sheet metal. And is that part of the project finished now, or do we anticipate that starting up again?
Yeah, through to the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. Yes, that's my understanding, is that the stage they're at, they've received a foundation permit only, not a full building permit. Right now, the project is, there's not a lot of activity on site right now because they're still awaiting their full building permit, so they're still in the foundation stage. But it is my understanding that they're now complete. The sheet pile work is complete.
Okay. And another, if I may, if we were to request a report, I know staff have a number of things on their plate right now with OCP and economic development plan and climate strategy and other things. And I guess what I'm wondering is, what time frame would you anticipate a report on this coming forward? And if it was going to be, you know, a couple months down the road, would it be of any benefit to this in this particular instance?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. To be quite clear, I think a quick turnaround on this report is going to be challenging for sure. I wouldn't expect it within the next couple of months. Regardless, it's a bit challenging because, as I noted, they're still they're just in the foundation stage. They have a long period of construction ahead of them. So even if we were to introduce a bylaw coming forward that changes the hours of construction, from a staff perspective, it's challenging. Would it apply to a project that already has their building permit? Are there legal implications associated with that? Are we opening ourselves up to potential risk and liability with respect to sort of changing the hours of construction midway through a construction project? So there's a number of issues that need to be considered if we're looking at this change. I think from a staff perspective as well, we want to look at, are there unintended consequences associated with this? Are we actually, by limiting the hours that sheet pile work can occur, are we actually prolonging the period of construction and actual sheet pile work over the construction period? So instead of a more intense time frame, are we opening it up to a much broader time frame? And how do we enforce that? So enforcement issues associated with that. So from a staff perspective, I think, you know, we would want to take our time with this staff report, and there's a lot of things that we need to look into, and we might be challenged in terms of what the recommendation is ultimately for council.
Councillor O'Keefe.
One more, I think.
You still have the floor. Okay,
thank you. So I'm also wondering whether it would be useful for staff to have some more specific direction rather than to just prepare a report. To me, in terms of looking at construction bylaws, so it seems to me that there's a distinction to be made between, you know, the regular hammering and drilling and trucks coming and going that comprises construction noise, and then the noise that you get from this sort of thing. Like, I'm very sympathetic to the residents. And so what I would be interested in would be a report that looked into those, to that kind of thing specifically. And would you envision that in a report, or is that something that you would want clarity in?
So through the mayor, Councillor O'Keefe, I guess through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, in terms of clarity for your question, are you referring to narrowing down our report specifically to sheet pile or construction time frame in general?
I guess it would, I think it would cover both, but I would like to see something specific on the sheet pile. I believe that our, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that our construction time frames are pretty well in sync with what goes on in the rest of the CRD, I believe. So I guess it'd be good to have that, but I'd also be interested in looking at something specific to deal with this kind of violent shaking. And maybe, as Ms. Verhagen mentioned earlier, maybe a special sort of section as we do for the blasting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if council has some clear direction that they would like staff to focus on, if it is, more focused on, this method of construction, is it potentially going to be more commonplace now in close proximity with sea level rise to the water, et cetera? Has it become more commonplace, perhaps? Requirements around notification maybe that we can look at in terms of, incorporating into our building bylaw as a possibility. Yeah, I mean, it would be helpful. I just want to make clear, though, that it's one of those that I think it's going to take some time. And as you pointed out, with what we have currently on the go, with the OCP review, with climate action, with the economic development strategy, with current development projects that we have on the go, it's going to be a real challenge to turn this around quickly. And it doesn't address this particular project either. This work is complete.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Before going to future speakers, I know I did close the presentation after Ms. Edwards presented and took questions, but I'm going to, as chair, pose a question to Ms. Edwards, if you're still connected and can hear us. Okay. And that is, in your letter, it specifically requests, and I'm quoting here, an amendment to noise bylaw number 1689 to distinguish between normal residential construction noise and noise coming from the construction of large multi-unit residential and commercial buildings. So we know some of the unique circumstances with this project. That is that the project is immediately adjacent to a residential neighborhood. When I say immediately adjacent, that is the property boundary for some homes shares a common boundary with this project. There's not a street in between or that sort of thing. There is for other residents. But in your speaking to council this evening, you do make reference to the sheet pile, the issues around sheet pile in your letter, but you spoke to them directly tonight. Is that your concerns are with regards to outcomes from the installation of sheet piling as it occurred in this particular development, and while that part of the project is now complete, you would like council to listen and make comment or direct staff to speak to what in a future project how installation of sheet piling might be dealt with in construction management. And separately, we know that this project is going to continue for some time, and that there will be general noise, if I can call that, from the other parts of construction for this process. And you're concerned with the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., 8 to 7 p.m., and the length of time you will be exposed to the noise in the future. So there's really the two matters that you've brought before us.
Correct. Yes, I think the steel piling is obviously a good first step and needs to be looked at as a method of construction, have more controls, but as well just the amount of noise that is still on the horizon for us in this neighborhood with this right essentially in our backyard, going forward for probably at least another year, if not longer, and then the prospect of it happening on the other side of us at the Cedarwood coming down the road. We just feel we need more controls around the type of noise from these large projects that are right next to our homes, so that we are able to enjoy our own backyards in the summertime without just constant noise.
Okay, thank you again, Ms. Edwards. And I think, if I may speak now to the motion on the floor, I think we've heard from the residents in terms of where the concerns lie. We have a recommendation to staff, and I think staff can address the concerns as they best see fit, and that would come back to council. I'll turn to Councillor Keefe as a second-time speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would propose to amend the motion to give staff a bit more direction. So I would propose something that we would refer to staff for a report to outline options and recommendations for limiting the hours of pile driving and or measures to mitigate the impact of pile driving. That would be one. And then also to consider options to reduce hours of construction.
Do we have a seconder to the amendment?
Second for discussion.
A second for discussion. Councillor O'Keefe?
I think this is, I think it's good to give staff a clear direction of some of the things that we want to come from the report, recognizing that it might not be, you know, for two or 3 months down the road. And I think it's important to, we're hoping to, well, anticipating that there's going to be more development in our community in the near future. Ms. Edwards mentioned possibly the Cedar Hill development, others around town. So I think it's good to give staff that direction in terms of what specifically do we want them to look at, rather than just saying to come back with a report. So.
Okay, thank you. I'll turn to the seconder before going to Councillor Rintoul. Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. I would concur. I think what we heard from Ms. Edwards and understanding the ramifications of a large project, a multifamily project, and then also dealing with sea level rise, flood levels, and things like that, different styles of construction. I think we need to address the specifics in this particular. This is not just about noise bylaw per se. I think this is specific to sheet piling and also the impact of large projects such as multifamily. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I understand the intent of trying to spell this out for staff in terms of how to construct the report, but I think we may be getting into the weeds, more than is necessary. The motion refers to driving piles. It doesn't speak to piles, addressed through vibratory compaction, and that's probably where this issue lies from the sounds of the description. So how descriptive do we need to be to ask for a report back on what clearly Ms. Edwards has articulated in terms of the nature of the problems? If we're going to be that specific, let's talk about looking at other municipalities and what they do around having an assessor come in advance to review a property to ensure it's not damaged in advance of adjacent blasting or adjacent piling. We could go on and on with trying to wordsmith how this staff report should be submitted. I think the intent is fairly clear. I'd prefer not to support this amendment and just stick with the original motion, but I'll listen to what colleagues have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing I would add would be a third, and that would be that there be notification similar to the blasting regulations we have within 100 meters prior to the activity taking place. And I say that simply because we're in the seismic zone, and people need to be able to distinguish between one and the other, and it's obviously apparently quite difficult to do. So that's just something I'd like to add to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. If I may speak for a moment and then turn to the mover, is that I concur with Councillor Rintoul, or will make my own comment that I think, by trying to give specific direction, we may be actually omitting other things. And I think staff have heard the concerns from the residents this evening. They've heard the discussion of council, and I'm sure they will review all related aspects to this. Staff have a lot of experience with regards to bylaws and enforcement and elements from other rules and regulations with regards to other jurisdictions, sort of thing. So I won't support this amendment. I think the motion is fairly straightforward based on the discussion we've had. Councillor Keefe?
Thank you. I'm just putting it forward just because I was getting a sense from staff wanting that direction. But if a question through you to staff, if staff feel that they've heard enough, that they don't need anything that specific, I'm happy to withdraw the motion.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. I think we've got the gist of what council's looking for. My main point though is that it needs to be clear that and I just want to reinforce that we'll do it as soon as we can, but it's going to be a bit, because we want to be thorough and bring something forward as well.
Sure. So I'm fine to withdraw.
The mover and seconder mover and seconder withdraw the amendments. So we have the main motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you again, Ms. Edwards. So we'll now return to our the next item on our agenda will be under bylaws, and it will be the item under 5B, and that is the business improvement area for the Sydney Sydney BIA bylaw number 2230. And I'll turn to Mr. Humble or to staff for an introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2022 is the final year of the current BIA's term, and a 5-year renewal must be done by bylaw. In working with the BIA, there are no changes to the bylaw being proposed. We're going to continue on with the 2.5% year increase. And as we did 5 years ago, we're proposing the very same renewal process, being the alternate approval process once again. Each time a BIA bylaw is renewed, it has to receive the approval from the commercial properties within the BIA area who have to pay for the levy. So letters would go out to all the impacted owners, telling them exactly what they have to do to oppose the adoption of the bylaw. Responses have to be received by a certain deadline. So if property owner chooses to oppose, they have to get a response in by May 27th. If the property owner is in support, there is no action required whatsoever. And then the bylaw may be adopted unless the majority of the property owner is liable for the levy oppose. And we expect to bring this back for adoption on June 13th.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. I have two. The first is that in the first page of the report, it said that there are no changes. No changes are proposed for the renewal bylaw, with the exception of the levy amounts, and that's clear in the report. And one small administrative addition. What is the administrative change, please?
It is in the recovery section. It's section 5.3. Essentially, we're articulating a practice that already occurs, but just to truly formalize it, I'm throwing it into the bylaw. Last year was the first time where the amount we collected differed by more than a nominal amount from the amount originally levied, and that difference occurs when there are supplementary assessments throughout the year that reduce the value of certain properties within the area. So for instance, we passed on to the BIA last year about $6,000 more than we collected because of those supplementary assessment changes. So we're going to take that difference and add it to this year's levy to make sure that the town remains whole.
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. And that may in part or in full answer the second question, and that is, it mentioned that the scheduled increases within the bylaw over the 5 years is a 2.5% increase, and you mentioned that the increase for 2023 would not quite be 2.5%. Is that related?
It's not related. All we did for year one was round it down to the closest round figure of 337,000 rather than 337,123 or whatever.
I see. Okay. Thank you. So we can proceed, Council, with 3 separate motions on readings and a separate motion on proceeding with the counter-petition process.
I'll move first reading to the Town of Sydney Business Improvement Area Bylaw number 2229.
Second.
All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries.
Move second reading.
Second.
We have it moved in second. I'll turn to Ms. Nelson.
Just for correction, the actual bylaw number is 2230.
My report says 2229.
Yeah, there's an error there.
Okay, 2230.
Okay, we thank you for the correction, Ms. Nelson. And so we are in discussion at second reading. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, the motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. And we have a second motion with regards to notification and counter-petition process.
I'll move that staff be authorized to undertake the required notification to initiate the counter petition process.
Second.
Discussion? I'll call a question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hissick. We'll know we don't have any development permit or development variance permit applications. We'll turn to number 7, which is adoption of minutes from our March 28th regular council meeting.
Move adoption.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We have no business completed at a previous meeting. Horizon report. We turn to Mayor's report. I have 2 items. The first is on the agenda. It's the CRD board highlights from the CRD board meeting of March 9th. I have nothing to specifically to speak to this evening, so I would look for a motion to receive for information, and happy to answer any questions.
Move for receipt for information.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. The second is just a verbal update. Council will recall at the last council meeting 2 weeks ago, the Peninsula Panthers Junior B hockey team was playing for the Vancouver Island Championship against the Oceanside Generals, and the mayors, the respective mayors of Parksville and Qualicum had reached out to the Peninsula mayors with a friendly challenge that the municipalities in the losing side would wear a team jersey and fly the municipal flag of the other municipality. As we've heard in the media, the Peninsula Panthers were successful and won the Vancouver Island Championship, and I'm pleased to report that Mayor Jeff Orr has forwarded a team jersey and the North Saanich flag to Mayor Ed Mains of Parksville, and we have forwarded a team jersey and the Sydney flag to Mayor Brian Weiss of Qualicum, and it was a lot of fun to show our support for these youth, for these young men, and for the men and women in the organization that support the team. And I have to say, we were inspired in taking in and watching these games that during the pandemic, these youth were able to maintain their skills at the highest level, and also successful as a team to compete at the highest level. And so just an update on that. With that, I'll turn to council reports. We have 2 this evening. I'll first turn to Councillor Garnett with a verbal report as our liaison to the Shaw Centre for the Sailor Sea.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be very brief here. The last board meeting was on March 29th, and then we were given a bit of an update. In March on CBC Gem, there was a nature documentary called Frick, I Love Nature, in which the center was actually a backdrop for filming of episode 3. So it's good advertising for the center, and they continue to branch out, which is amazing. They also will be partnering with the, I have to get this right, the Hakai Institute to sample environmental DNA in the waters around Sydney. The data will provide a snapshot of what mammals and fish live and transport through in our area over the course of a year. So this is another example of the educational aspects of the center, which they do a tremendous job through their fish and their octopus and everything else they're involved in, and sharing in with UVic and various science departments. Another great example, and it'll be interesting to hear if what the data actually shows about our waters around here when it comes back, and hopefully we'll hear something good on that end. As council may remember, I had advised that the center was looking into adopting an EAP, and they did so, and it came into effect March 1st, and it's already been providing a benefit to employees. So it's another example of, no matter how large or small an organization is, these particular things provide a great benefit for employees, and I'm happy that they've gone this route. They've also, at the end of April, will be adopting an employee volunteer program, which allows staff to volunteer with like-minded organizations for a select number of paid volunteer days each year. So this is another great way to outreach to other organizations in the nearby communities. And I think we'll probably have another also positive benefit to the employees that work there. For the month of March, there were more than 6,900 visitors, and this outperformed their planned total of 6,500. Tuesday, March 22nd, actually had 521 guests, which Miss Pauline Finn, who's the executive director, said has the most that she's ever seen since her arrival. So this was amazing. And actually, at the end of that day, they had already met their goal for the month in terms of economic performance, and they still had 9 days to go, all of which were spring break. So I haven't got the final results yet for that, but it bodes really well for them going forward. And given everything else, they updated their financial forecast, and they had initially thought that, and the year ends at May 31st, that they would be in a position where they'd be minus 37,000 for the year, and they're now forecasting a surplus of 15,000. So it could conceivably be even better, given that there was so much more time in spring break to go, and I'm assuming that their numbers were still very good. So these are positive things to hear. They're reaching out and expanding their visibility in the community and beyond. So positive news from there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for the positive update, Councillor Garnett. Look for a motion to receive the verbal report.
So move. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion or questions? All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor Duncan, our liaison to the Sydney BIA.
Thank you. Now, just briefly, because I know the SBIA is very good with their communication, and I believe we're all in their emails, so we would have got the update. And with regards to finances, they always provide that update themselves, and it was excellent. But they had their annual general meeting at the end of March, and so I just kind of wanted to highlight both their board elections, which they did provide in their email as well, and just some of their lessons learned as they went over it about the COVID pandemic, which wasn't all bad. I mean, they still managed to get the grant with the commercial lighting, the string lighting for downtown they're excited about. And they found that they had such enormous support from Sydney and North Sandwich residents for the local businesses that they really had wanted to offer their gratitude to our residents for supporting them through that. And our town thrived despite everything. Mr. Hissick was present for the clean financial audit report, so we know that this is all good. They felt that the events that they were able to do for COVID and the way they had to pivot to have events that were kind of longer lasting and to make them more accessible and provide spread out economic benefits was interesting. That it actually, in making them think outside the box, they think that it actually has brought some benefits to the type of events that we can do. And regardless of the way COVID continues, it looks like we're returning to regular events and programming from 2022 on, so that's great. As many of us know, Brad Edgett will be stepping down, and so they have a new interim president with Devin Bird, and the new VP is Nick Coates. And otherwise, the rest of the board will be continuing on, and best of luck to them with a new great year for 2022.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. If we could have a motion to receive.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now turn to committee reports, and I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, who is our liaison to the OCP Review Advisory Committee, and thank Councillor Wainwright for chairing that meeting in my absence. Councillor Wainwright?
I'll move that the minutes be received.
Second.
Any discussion?
I think the minutes are straightforward.
Thank you. I'll call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries. And I'll turn to Councillor Fallout, who is our chair of our committee of the whole meeting last week, April 4th.
Thank you. Move receipt of the minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed. Motion carries.
And there was one recommendation that came out of committee of the whole, and that's for the tax distribution policy. Committee recommends, and I so move, that the difference in tax rates between the residential and business property classes be reduced gradually over 10 years using the hybrid setting method, and that the reduction begin in 2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? I have three opposed. Councillor Fallout, Councillor O'Keefe, and Councillor O'Toole. The motion carries. Thank you, Councillor Fallout. We'll turn to Councillor O'Toole for two sets of, well, a bunch of sets of minutes, but the first three are under 12C, the Advisory Planning Commission meetings of March 15th, 17th, and 22nd.
I'll move receipt of the APC minutes, March 15th, 17th, 22nd.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank the APC for the amount of time they spent reviewing the draft OCP over a series of 3 meetings. Certainly the group came very well prepared, which made the process that much easier, and that you know, we went through the package line by line, and everyone put a lot of time and effort in at the front end to make sure and come prepared. So very well, great job by the chair, and very much appreciated that members of the APC provided such valuable insight. Obviously, this package shared with the OCP Review Advisory Committee for their deliberations and the comments, and I'll just draw a couple of quick examples to what I think were some fairly unique observations to show the level of detail. I know on page 4 there's some conversation here with respect to housing partnerships addressed in the OCP, and an example there of you know, why not look to strata councils in order to restrict the number of rentals in those stratas to help with housing. Also, why not look to opening up more possibility for liveaboards in marinas, in facilities that have absolute facilities to accommodate liveaboard in those environments and marine environments. So those were interesting discussions. I'll also note page 8 as just an example where it talks about the issue of sea level rise as an example, and FCL. And this is where we saw some discussion where the commission had hoped maybe to see some more detail in the OCP, and I think Mr. Newcomb did a very good job of explaining the linkages between the OCP and some of these other documents and pieces that need to obviously continue to evolve and be developed. Zoning bylaws are another example, so that the OCP is not necessarily you know, the document with all of the answers, but it is that roadmap, that overview of the community plan, and it will trigger, as we're aware, a number of changes in things like zoning bylaws at a future date to align them more to this OCP. So that was an interesting discussion, I think, that the commission had, and that Mr. Newcomb well addressed. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor O'Toole. So the motion is on the floor. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And none opposed, the motion carries. And then, so those minutes were specific to reviewing the draft OCP. We then have under 12D the minutes of the Advisory Planning Commission of April 5th with regular business.
Thank you. I'll move receipt of the minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. Please continue.
Thank you. I'll move recommendations from those meetings at this point. First off, the Advisory Planning Commission recommends, and I so move with respect to Development Permit Application number DP 100824 and Development Variance Permit Application DV 100309, that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 9617 7th Street be notified regarding Development Variance Permit Application number DV 100309 to increase maximum building height for the 2 proposed dwellings, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to Council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance. 2, that Development Permit Variance Application number DP 100824 to permit the construction of 2 small lot single-family dwellings for the property at 9617 7th Street be brought before Council for consideration of approval if Council authorizes the issuance of the Development Variance Permit. 3, that as conditions of approval of Development Permit Application number DP 100824, the property owner shall, prior to the issuance of the building permit, A, address design guidelines number 19.3.4 materials and 19.319 colors to the satisfaction of the senior manager of current planning. B, install tree protection fencing around the protected Japanese privet tree to the satisfaction of the Director of Engineering. Keep the fencing in place until such time that all construction of the property is complete, and ensure that any necessary work inside the tree protection fencing be undertaken under the direct supervision of a certified consulting arborist. And C, pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated cost to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed, the motion carries. I know you have 2 more recommendations, and they're both fairly long. Thank you, Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you. Recommendation number 2, the Advisory Planning Commission recommends, and I so move, the development permit application number DP 100829 to permit the development of a 4-story multifamily residential development at 9989 and 9991 5th Street be approved, subject to the following conditions. 1, that the property owner shall, prior to the issuance of building permit, A, address design guide number 20.3.23 hard surface materials to the satisfaction of the senior manager of current planning. B, install tree protection fencing around adjacent boulevard trees and around all protected trees on adjacent properties near the property lines of the subject property to the satisfaction of the Director of Development Services, Engineering, Parks and Works. Fencing must be kept in place until such time that all construction on the property is complete and any necessary work inside the tree protection fencing is to be undertaken under the direct supervision of a certified consulting arborist. C, adhere to the tree preservation plan for the development, including all recommended measures to protect the cherry and Douglas fir trees at 9975 5th Street. D, pay to the town a deposit of $2,500 for the costs associated with removing and replacing the protected Douglas fir tree located at 9975 5th Street in the event that this tree dies or suffers significant damage during construction. The deposit will be held by the town for 2 years following occupancy of the building to ensure the survival of the protected tree. E, pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated cost to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development, and F, register a restrictive covenant on the title of the property prohibiting the future strata council from passing any bylaws that may restrict occupancy on the basis of age.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Discussion? I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, then Councillor O'Keefe.
I won't support it. I think it's pretty well known now that, yeah, my concern is around the fact that there was no thought given to addressing the building envelope with regards to the protected trees. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just make a remark that the council does have the ability to make a motion with regards to the building envelope. So I'll leave that comment there and turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question to staff through you in regards to Section D about the $2,500 deposit. Is that something new? I just don't recall seeing that in a recommendation before. Is that a normal part of our process with trees, or is this? I just haven't seen it before.
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, I believe it is. I see Ms. Verhagen on the screen, so I may defer to her just for confirmation.
Ms. Verhagen.
Yes, hello. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe. This was a condition on the original development permit for this building when the DP was originally, the first development permit was issued before it expired. We're recommending it for this tree in this case because it is a larger fir tree, and the arborist has indicated that it may be a challenge to retain it, and the applicant has indicated that they would like to retain it. So we're recommending that a bond be taken to ensure that it is protected, and if not, then we have the bond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Fallon.
Thank you. I do have some concerns about the project, and it runs around the trees, in particular the tree that is actually on the neighboring property. The building envelope is such that it's taking up the full allowable space on the property, and I think there's going to be a challenge to protect the trees, and especially this one where there is strong motivation from the neighbors that they don't want the tree. They would like to see it come down. I'm just concerned that the owner did nothing to mitigate the design to accommodate the trees, so I won't support it the way this the recommendations are right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question through to staff, and that is that the excavation permit was granted and excavation did commence, and the excavation commenced fairly closely to the property lines, not right to the property lines. Is it anticipated, or is staff actually able to comment whether, as it proceeds, whether further excavation towards these trees, the tree on the adjacent property and the trees on the boulevard, will occur, or really the excavation has been done to the extent it needs to be done?
defer to Ms. Verhagen.
Yes.
Ms. Verhagen?
There is a lot more excavation that would have to be done on the site in order to facilitate the construction of this building. Only a portion of the excavation was started. So it would be excavated to property line on all 4 property lines to allow for the construction of the underground parking. So there would be more excavation to property line.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. And Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. Now, I'm just going to, and correct me if my recollection is wrong, this property, I seem to recall neighbors being in favor of the removal of these trees because of their adjacency to this new building and their concern for the safety of their homes, just given how little space these trees would have now, the Douglas fir in particular. And so what I'm concerned about here is that these trees, in all likelihood, we would be hearing back from these neighbors in a couple years after this building got built anyway, and we've had a couple issues like that already, and that this is just a case of either this building wouldn't be approved at all because we are going to try to save these trees, or we approve this building and then we have to pull out these trees. This is Douglas fir in particular is not a species that can exist in urban environments. it requires a forest. So I'm okay with the tree removal. It's consistent with approving this project.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I would just speak or perhaps try to clarify one comment made, and that is with regards to either we approve this and it has the impact of the tree, or we don't approve the development. Council has the ability to make a motion to instruct the developer to alter the footprint of the development. We had that when it first came before us, and we forwarded it to APC, and that remains with it this time. I'm not proposing that myself, but I'm just speaking to its clarifying that it's not a case of either or. Council does have decision making that it can pursue. I'll turn back to Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I know that there are a number of citizens who pay careful attention to how we deal with trees in Sydney. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I know if I don't say anything, we'll probably still get letters. That while council could do that and try to protect a Douglas fir tree, some species of trees, Douglas fir among them, are simply incompatible with urban development. And even if you moved buildings back and protected the root zone, these are trees that require a forest for wind protection. They require the protection, the grouping of other trees to cut winds and for stability and for disease protection and everything. And a habitat for animals is based on having an intact ecosystem around them. And so what I'm concerned about beginning to focus on individual trees when we're looking at urbanization of our town and citizens ending up being distracted by the idea of protecting these individual trees, which are simply incompatible with the built form that's going to exist in this area, and that what we need to be doing is focusing on reclaiming, restoring, and protecting actual intact ecosystems that have a chance of making it and providing values in other places.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Duncan. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. Thank you very much. And I think it's a good point to make as, you know, we anticipate other developments coming along. And I don't like the idea of, as Councillor Duncan says, focusing on one or two particular trees on a property without having some broader context. You know, maybe if we have concerns about this, maybe we need to round out our tree preservation policy a bit more to make clear to developers and to ourselves in terms of in what sort of circumstances it would be suitable to ask the developer to adjust their footprint. I'm not an arborist, so I don't know. I mean, and balancing what Councillor Duncan is telling us with, you know, the need for new housing and the need to have to try and save trees. So I think there's some benefit at some point to maybe looking at our tree preservation a bit more closely for ourselves and the community to flesh that out a bit more. So for now, I'm happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing I would say is that, you know, when do you stop picking and choosing? Which tree do you save, which tree don't you save? And by the time it's all said and done, development after development after development, and we're losing protected tree after protected tree after protected tree, eventually we've lost a forest worth of trees. Our urban canopy is one of the lowest in the CRD. We have to do something. And the tree's healthy now, so I understand what you're saying, and it makes total sense, but it's survived well up till now. So I just don't see that this if we have the ability to and I know you've spoken to that, but the reason I don't want to put a motion for it is I know this is going to pass anyways. But the fact of the matter is that you mean, where does it stop? Where do you stop? Oh, well, that particular tree isn't going to survive. Well, that one might not. Well, if you don't give them a chance to survive, they definitely don't survive. And our community becomes less livable for many reasons, most of which in the downtown core is going to be heat retention. These provide a lot of relief. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call a question. All in favour? Opposed? We have 2 opposed, Councillor Garnett and Councillor Fallett. The motion carries. Thank you. Thank you for the discussion. And I'll turn back to Councillor Rantoul, who has one more long recommendation to make.
Thank you, Mayor. The Advisory Planning Commission recommends, and I so move, that development permit application number DP 100828 2270 Harbour Road to permit the development of 4 3-story mixed-use buildings be approved subject to the following conditions. 1, that the property owner shall, prior to the issuance of building permit, A, increase the minimum width of all maneuvering aisles to 6.6 meters. B, address design guidelines number 25.3.3, colors and materials, and 25.3.17, A, areas of glazing to the satisfaction of the senior manager of current planning. C, receive approval for the registration of the proposed 3-lot subdivision of the property. D, register a flood hazard covenant on the title of the property, referencing the submitted engineer's report. E, register a restrictive covenant on the title of the property, expressing knowledge of surrounding marine, industrial, and commercial uses. F, register a reciprocal access easement on proposed lots 2 and 3 for parking access. And G, pay to the town deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated cost to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favour? None opposed. The motion carries. We'll now turn to staff reports, and the first is staff report on the bylaw notice enforcement system, and I'll turn to Ms. Clary for an introduction, please. Good evening, Ms. Clary.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. So staff would like to bring forward, would like to develop a bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, which would allow for a simplified ticketing and dispute process for minor bylaw infractions. The Local Government Bylaw Notice Enforcement Act allows municipalities to do this. And at this time, over 100 municipalities in BC have adopted similar bylaws. The town currently uses municipal ticket information system for issuing fines at this time. This system is good, however, it can be challenging to issue fines. They have to be issued on a person, and it can be time consuming and costly if someone disputes these fines, as we have to go through a formal court process. There are many details that still need to be sorted out about a bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, including finding a roster organization, and that roster organization will appoint adjudicators for the town, selecting screening officers who will likely be senior staff members at town, and selecting hearing locations that could be a town meeting room. However, staff would like council's approval and support before proceeding with the bylaw adoption or bylaw development, because there is a bit of work to go into actually developing the bylaw and sorting those things out. And if council does support it, we plan to bring forward a bylaw at a future council meeting for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Clary. I'll turn first to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Through you to staff. Thank you, Ms. Clary. Just curious, under the background section, it says that, however, in the case of an ongoing or egregious bylaw infraction, fines may be issued. I was surprised by how lightly that was phrased, and it wouldn't be fines will be issued if it's egregious. Is there a reason why we take that? It seems really super passive for something that seems like it should be more enforced.
Through to Councillor Garnett. Yeah, it depends on the infraction, but yes, if it was egregious and ongoing, we will likely issue a fine. However, if there's not enough evidence to actually back up that fine, it still is very challenging to issue a fine under the current system because of the long legal battle that we may face if the person disputes it.
And if I may, one more question. Under method of service on page 2, it mentions mailed. Now, would that be a registered letter, I'm guessing, or just a regular letter? How would you propose that would be sent out?
Yeah, typically it would probably be a registered letter. I don't know if just a mailed letter could count as actually being delivered. My understanding is from other bylaw notices that we sent out, they have to be registered for the court to actually accept them.
The only because I'm in this line of work, the only reservation I would have is that as presently right now, I know this is going to take a while to come forward, and hopefully by that point Canada Post will have changed its methodology, but as of now I think it's phase 10 we're supposed to switch to this. All registered letters are carded, so the person we left a card at their door in their box, and then they go to pick them up if they choose to. So just so staff's aware that until that's removed and we actually go to the door to get a signature, there's no guarantee that they will actually get that item. But I can advise you when we move to that next phase so that you're aware of it. Just wanted to let you know. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Ms. Clary. Yeah, this is intriguing. It was an interesting read, I think. It does seem like a fair bit of work to get to this point, but obviously staff are supportive of moving forward in this direction. One item for clarification, you refer on page 3 with respect to the adjudication hearing that the $25 administrative fee would be paid depending on the outcome by the applicant, the individual who's been fined. But tell me about the adjudicator, and I know there's a roster system, and I think I read somewhere that roster system is appointed by the Attorney General or the qualified adjudicators. Who compensates them? I'm assuming it's more than $25. So how is that process? How is that recouped?
Yes, so the town would cover that process and recoup up to $25. So it wouldn't be a burden on the person who's actually disputing the fine. Right now, it's thousands of dollars to go to court when someone disputes it, and we expect it to be more like $250 to $500 on the regular, maybe up to $1,000 in those costs. But yeah, the town would bear those costs.
So if I may, in follow up, why $25 and not more, knowing that the adjudicators' costs, again, I'm assuming are going to be higher than $25?
That is a part of the regulation that was set out by the province to limit the expense of someone who wants to dispute a bylaw infraction fine. So right now, if someone disputes a bylaw infraction, they may need to hire a legal counsel and have witnesses support them in court. However, this is to really limit the burden of someone who wants to dispute a fine, and they would only be responsible for covering their own cost of actually attending a hearing and supplying their own evidence, and then the $25.
Thank you. And in other jurisdictions, you referred to hundreds or over 100 in British Columbia. I take it they are finding indeed that that's still cost effective despite that limitation in terms of cost recovery limited to $25 versus the current process.
Correct. As mentioned, it can be thousands of dollars to collect like a $300 fine. The town has recently experienced this. However, this will limit the town's cost to a number of $100.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. And so we do have a sorry, I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a few questions through you to staff, Mr. Mayor. So my understanding is we're still going to have the other system for the bigger things. Where do you see this new process having the most impact, like in parking things, or any particular areas where you think we'll be able to do more enforcement as a result?
Yes, parking is definitely one. At the current time, Robbins has a parking notice violation, and town staff occasionally issue parking notice violations on behalf of Robbins if Robbins isn't able to get there. So this would allow town staff to issue our own bylaw notice enforcement for parking violations. So municipal tickets can't be left on someone's vehicle, whereas a bylaw notice can be left on someone's vehicle. There's also many other smaller fine things like minor noise infraction, or there's many other small infractions where this could be used, where it will be much easier because the risk of disputing an MTI makes it much more challenging to issue an MTI. And so we will, not that we want to issue a whole bunch more tickets, but it'll make it easier in times of, you know, the more persistent violators who may not have a real evidence trail. We could use it in those situations.
And just so one follow-up. So do you anticipate our, how shall I say, our enforcement reach will be expanded, that we'll be able to get to more things or attend to more issues because of this process is easier, and bylaw enforcement officers won't have to be spending as much time on these things, so they'll be able to get out there and put more of these notices out?
Definitely, yeah. They will be able to issue more, again, not that we want to issue a whole bunch of fines. The first step is education, but in situations, it'll make it easier to issue a fine. And then if someone comes into town hall and they want to dispute it, they could speak with the screening officer, who could maybe set up an agreement where the person signs off not to do whatever they were doing again, and we could waive the fine at that point. So it makes an easier way to also, you know, forgive fines if someone, you know, maybe realized that they were wrong or did something incorrectly, and they can just solve it instead of actually having to pay the fine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keith. And so I have to apologize and turn to Ms. Nelson. We haven't made a motion yet. We've just been asking questions. Councillor Rintoul, or Councillor Wainwright?
I'll move that staff be authorized to develop a bylaw notice enforcement bylaw to be considered at a future council meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Oh, Councillor. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. And we'll turn to 13B, which is a staff report on the 2023 FCM Municipal Asset Management Program grant. And I'll turn to Ms. Clary for an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. So staff would like to apply for an FCM Municipal Asset Management Program grant for the 2023 portion of the asset management plan. If council approves this application, staff plan to apply for the maximum amount, which is $50,000, and this would be for stormwater and wastewater asset management plans for the town.
Thank you. I'll turn to council if there are any questions. Seeing none, we have a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that staff be authorized to apply for 2023 FCM Municipal Asset Management Program funding for the development of the wastewater and stormwater networks asset management plans, and if successful, that the town commits to fund the remaining 2023 project costs up to a maximum of the difference between the total project budget of $110,000 and the amount of the grant received.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Turn to movers and seconders. None. Call a question. All in favor? None opposed. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Clary. And we'll turn to item 14, correspondence. We have a letter from the Sydney Museum and Archives regarding their waterfront signage redesign project, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move that the project be approved.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just having attended a meeting on the weekend, had a chance to speak with the Executive Director Gerwing and Ms. Gerwing, and this is very exciting. Like I can't wait to see it come to fruition. I know it's gonna. If you look at the timeline, it's gonna take a bit of time to get there, but this is something that the museum spearheaded, and they're you know, the town's gonna get a great amenity out of it, and it will add so much to our community. So thank you very much to Ms. Gerwing and her staff and her board, and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll just echo the comments that this is a great project. I know it's something that's been talked about for a number of years to review those. And the other thing that I like that they've done here is they've laid out a timeline, and I also like the engagement strategies, so that they're going out to the public to say, we're going to fix up the ones that we currently have, but let's look at some ideas for other things. So I think that's perfect. So very happy to see this go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have 5 items of correspondence under correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carries. We have no notices of motion or motion to go on camera this evening, so I'll look for motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?